Well, good afternoon. We are at the last of our sessions together, live sessions of lecture notes and PowerPoint slides, etc. We're going to cover the three bonus chapters this evening. I think we'll give you a little bit more insight to some of the things we've already talked about and help you along the way in understanding things that businesses go through. And then with the last chapter we're going to talk about is managing your own personal finances, which is a topic that's always interesting and something that we all need to pay attention to because the sooner we get a handle on our personal finances, the better that they can work for us instead of us working for them. So our first chapter, bonus chapter A, working within the legal environment. So let's look at our learning objectives here for this particular session. Define business law, distinguish between statutory and common law, and explain the role of administrative agencies. Define tort law and explain the role of product liability tort law. Identify the purposes and conditions of patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Describe warranties and negotiable instruments as covered in the Uniform Commercial Code. List and describe the conditions necessary to make a legally enforceable contract, and describe the possible consequences if a contract is not lived up to. Summarize the several laws that regulate competition and protect consumers in the United States. Explain the role of tax laws in generating income. The government has a method of discouraging and encouraging behaviors among taxpayers. Distinguish among the various types of bankruptcy as outlined by the Bankruptcy Code. And finally, explain the role of deregulation as a tool to encourage competition. Actually, I'm not sure deregulation in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases actually encourages competition. And the classic that I want to give you for that is we deregulated the airlines back in the 1970s, I think it was, maybe perhaps a little bit later. And since then, we have had a number of airlines go out of business. TWA, we've had Pan American, we've had some other ones that you may know, and a number have merged together. So we actually have fewer airlines today. And many airline travelers would tell you that airline travel is not nearly as friendly today as it used to be. Now, having said that, I just want to come back and give you another thing. I remember years ago, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma on business. And I finished it, I don't remember what time of the day it was, and I was flying to Oklahoma City. Probably would have been better for me to have rented a car and driven to Oklahoma City because the distance is not that far. But anyway, that's what I was doing. I got on a plane, a very large TWA plane. I don't remember the model. There were 26 passengers on the plane and 7 crews, I remember. It took us 26 minutes to get from Tulsa to Oklahoma City, and we didn't get any service. Well, we didn't need any. We weren't in a plane that long. So in those days, planes were required to fly certain routes. So eliminating that part probably would have made competition better, but eliminating everything we did, I'm not sure that it really actually wound up helping the consumer. If we have true competition, then the consumer normally comes out ahead because people want your business. They're going to produce quality merchandise. They're going to exceed your expectations, like we've talked about in this course, and most likely deliver what you want at less expense to you. But when we do the regulation in certain ways that it eliminates competition, then the consumer is the loser. So why do we need laws? We need laws because we have to have certain types of behavior in a civilized society. Some of us don't particularly like that, but we have to have that. Otherwise, we would have anarchy and chaos all the time. So we have a judiciary branch, which is one of the three branches of government in the United States, administrative being the president and his cabinet, or the governor and his cabinet, or her cabinet, depending upon the state in which you live, or a mayor of a city and the cabinet that he or she has. And then we have the legislative branch, but U.S. Congress and the various legislatures in the states. And of course, cities and counties have bodies that pass laws as well, city councils, county commissions, etc. And then we have the judiciary. We have federal judiciary, state judiciary, and then local judiciary, as it says here at the bottom of the slide. We have different types of courts. We have criminal courts and we have civil courts. Criminal courts here are things in which somebody has committed a crime, or what is normally known in legal areas as a tort, that is a harm against somebody else. Civil law is a little bit different. Here we have things like divorces and things of that nature. We have various levels within the judiciary system, and the one it speaks to here is an appellate court, and the appellate court will hear appeals, if the appeal is successful, by the way, on the merits of the previous case. Lawyers will appeal cases because they feel that the trial judge erred, he or she did not interpret the law correctly, and various and sundry other things. Of course, states will appeal for on the same grounds. So that's what the appellate court does. We have levels of appellate courts, state, obviously, federal, and then all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. These are the types of laws that we have. We have criminal law, which we sort of talked about just a second ago. And notice what it does. It establishes punishments. Criminal law, now here we're not talking about the courts themselves, regulates an investigation and the prosecution against people who have been accused. I want to use that word, accused of committing a crime. And in civil laws we talked about before, non-criminal acts. When I mentioned divorce, personal injury, things of that nature. Business law is different than these other two. The business law does not normally go to a court, but it gives us a framework under which business is conducted, contracts, etc. Now, that does not mean to say that somebody could not go to court over a particular issue, which is business related. But what it does mean to say is that business law gives us a framework. And notice it says the rules and statutes and codes, etc., under which businesses operate and conduct business with each other and with consumers, etc. Then we have administrative agencies. And these agencies are empowered by the legislative branch of government to enforce rules and regulations and to interpret them in many instances. And the examples of administrative agencies given here: Federal Reserve Board, Securities and Exchange Commission, Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, etc., and the Internal Revenue Service that all of us want to fuss about. But think about what the Internal Revenue Service does. It goes out and collects money that is due to the government to help the government run. So whenever you want to complain about the IRS doing something, complain to your legislator. Because your legislator, your congressman, congresswoman, or senator is one of the people who voted to give them certain powers to do things. Now, yes, I'm not saying that the IRS should be walking around with a big hammer trying to beat people over the head and things of that nature, but they're doing their job. And collecting taxes is part of their job. It's an unfortunate thing. It's something that most people don't like. And you know from history, tax collectors were looked down upon, but they have a job to do. So those are administrative agencies, and of course there are many more. Those are just some of the ones that we're most familiar with. And this particular slide that I have up here, you can see in your text on page A4, it is figure A1, and it gives you federal agencies, state agencies, and local agencies. It gives an example of what they are, and then what types of powers and functions they have. So we need to move on here because this gets into, I think, the interesting part, the more interesting part, at least to me, what we want to talk about tonight, and that's what is a tort. Notice what the first thing it says, it's a wrongful act. And it causes harm to a person's property, a person's reputation. Now, notice the term wrongful act. That means what that person who is accused of this tort, parenthesis crime, has broken a law that has been passed by a legislative body. And so that person is held accountable for his or her transgressions and is brought to stand before the bar. That's what it's known as, standing before the bar, and defending him or herself. Now, a tort is a criminal act. And I want to point out to you that in criminal cases, not civil cases, criminal cases, a defendant must be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have a reasonable doubt, if you're a juror and you have a reasonable doubt, then you have to vote for acquittal. There's a very good movie. It goes back into the 1950s that you may be able to get from Netflix or somebody called 12 Angry Men. And I commend the movie to you simply because it gives a good idea of taking people through a jury deliberation process. So anyway, intentional tort is a willful act that would be premeditated in some cases. And then negligence is a little different. Well, probably negligence is a lot different because it is something that was done, but there was no intention to do that. I guess the classic case is the woman who some years ago was burned by scalding coffee, and I use the word scalding, when she opened up her cup of McDonald's coffee in her car. Case caused a lot of hoorang and how much it caused people and how much money was paid out. Of course, most of us didn't know or didn't pay attention to the fact that the jury award was reduced. And that's why we have warnings on cups and things today about contains hot liquid and things of that nature. Should we be warned about that? Yes, I think we should, because we don't always pay attention to what we get. We are past the old dictum, if you will, of caveat emptor, which really boils down to buyer beware. We're past that stage. So people ought to know what they're buying, and it has the potential to do harm. I notice I used the word potential. Not that it will do harm, but the potential to do harm. Now, these are what's known here as, or what we have on the slide, are product liability laws. And the product liability, notice it holds the businesses liable for the harm that results from production, design, inadequate warnings, etc. Strict product liability, on the other hand, goes a step further, and it is liability without regard to fault. Notice what it says here, that a company can be held liable for a product even if it did not know of the defect. Now that's very, very strong language. And what that should say to us, what it should say to manufacturers is, please pay attention to what you do. And how many times we hear about children's toys being recalled because the child could swallow something or something comes off, it has lead-based paint, and things of that nature. So lead-based paint, you say, oh, well, that's okay as long as it's contained. But if you scrape the paint off or the paint wears off, which it will do over a period of time, then the lead fumes come around. And the fact of the matter is, a child who is young enough cannot overcome lead poisoning if it begins. Lead poisoning is irreversible. As a matter of fact, there's was a postulate some years ago that what caused the decline of the Roman Empire was lead poisoning. The Romans were very good with their aqueducts. All their aqueducts were built with pipes lined in lead. After a period of time, the lead leached out. Now, how true that is, I don't know because I did not read that work, but it certainly is plausible. This next slide gives you some major product liability cases. The Ford Pinto which is one. There are many, many others. You can see this in your text, figure A.2 on page A6. The Ford Motor Company is the most, probably the most well-known. Ford Motor Company, by the way, I owned a Pinto. I had a Pinto, sold it when it had almost 115,000 miles on it. That could have been fixed by a part that would have added about $6 to the cost of the car. Ford decided, and I'm not asking you to decide on the ethics of this, what I'm going to tell you. Ford decided it was less expensive for them to roll the dice and pay off any claims that came in as opposed to adding that to the car. This is another huge area that we need to talk about because this is part of business law, and that is patents, copyrights, and trademarks. A patent, notice, is a document issued to an inventor or a manufacturer the rights to an invention without competition for 20 years. In other words, what this says is that Mr. X inventor or Ms. Y inventor has a product which nobody else may infringe upon for 20 years. If in fact somebody tries to do that, then the holder of the patent can sue for patent infringement rights. After 20 years, that goes away. There's no longer any protection. And what you find happening, pardon me, is that in year 17 or so, maybe a little sooner, competitors will start making a generic or something else that they're ready to bring on the market as soon as that patent expires. Copyright protects a creator. This is known as intellectual property. Copyrights cover intellectual property like books, music, other types of publications, and things of that nature. And that means that person has exclusive rights to use that for a certain period of time. For instance, if you want to use something from a book, that depending upon the publisher, it's either more than 50 words or more than 100, you have to get permission from the author or the publisher to do that, and if the author is no longer alive, from his or her heirs. And then a trademark, we talked a little bit back in the marketing chapters, gives you a legally protected name like Coke or Scotch tape or Kleenex, or a symbol, or as the slide, pardon me, excuse me, says a design that clearly identifies this product as belonging to XYZ Corporation. I'm not going to go through this whole slide with you, but what I will tell you is this. If you have an idea and you think that the idea has merit to earn a patent from the U.S. Patent Office, by all means contact a lawyer who is versed in patent law. It takes a special type of person to do that. Yes, you could go talk to your family lawyer or someone that you're familiar with who does general legal work, but you would ask him or her to recommend a patent lawyer. If that doesn't work, you can go to the local bar association and they can help you out. You need to have legal help with this. Is it going to cost you some money? Yes, it is. I'm not going to dismiss that, but you need to have some help so you have an idea of where you are. This just talks about patent leaders in 2013. Notice the number of patents that were awarded to IBM, almost 7,000. And that's not something that we're going to spend a lot of time on. Now, the next thing we're going to come to is a Uniform Code, Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. I just want to stop here for a second and tell you the UCC is used in all 50 states except Louisiana. Louisiana still uses parts of Napoleonic Code. Notice what it governs: sales laws and other commercial laws. There are 11 articles in the UCC covering all sorts of business issues. Now, we're not going to talk about each one of these, but to give you an idea where it is, and you can go to UCC there and find out what you're looking for. Get some additional information. This particular slide talks about warranties. And notice what a warranty does. It guarantees that the product sold will meet your specifications for the purpose which it is intended to be used. Now, you have to pay attention to that, because what it is saying is if you use it for something other than what it is intended and it breaks down or causes harm, that is your fault. You have no way to recover anything. Product has to be used as it is intended for you to recover something if it breaks down or causes harm to somebody else, a warranty. A specific warranty is telling you, the buyer, I, the manufacturer, make these representations about the product, and you can rely on them because that's what I'm saying. An implied warranty is much different. It is not clearly stated as an express warranty is. It is imposed upon the seller, who implies, notice, again implies, that the product will conform, to the standards of trade. So we really have to pay attention to that, because that can cause us some difficulty if we don't. Now, we get into what are known as negotiable instruments. And this is something that means that if you have a negotiable instrument, it could be turned into cash or something else. Not necessarily that's true, or not necessarily that you wanted to do that, but it could be that you are. Notice that they are, in the text, they are traded among businesses or transferred among businesses, and they represent a promise to pay, negotiable. So there are 4 particular conditions for using a negotiable instrument. The negotiable instrument must be written by and signed by the maker. No one else can do that. It has to be made payable on demand at a specific date. Made payable to the person or persons or entity, if you will, who holds the negotiable instrument to the bearer. I have it. Okay. And contain an unconditional promise to pay a specified amount. Unconditional. So now we come to what's known as contract law. This is, notice the first words here. Legally enforceable agreement between two or more parties to do something. So contract law, we're going to get into the various things that you have to have contract law, specifies what constitutes a legally enforceable agreement. Some things are not legally enforceable because they're clearly outside the law. And a breach of contract is simple. One party fails to live up to his or her end of the contract. It really don't need any more information on that. That's a very simple statement there. Now we're going to get to contract requirements. These are the 6 criteria, if you will, that make a contract not only legal, but as the next word says, binding. Okay, so the legal part means that we were both able to enter into this contract because we meet certain requirements. The binding means not only is this contract legal, but buddy, you need to pay up or deliver when the time comes. So notice at the beginning, someone makes an offer and then someone else accepts that offer. Both parties are given consideration. Okay, what this says is I'll sell X to you for Y dollars. I'll sell X to you, whatever I have here in my hand or behind me on the shelf, etc., for Y dollars. Both of us are competent. In other words, one of us is not mentally impaired. The contract covers a legal action. So what this means is, if you're trying to sell stolen something, normally referred to in legalese as contraband, if you're trying to sell something that you've gotten from somebody else and it was stolen from somebody else, it's not a legal act. You're selling something that was stolen. Now, even if you don't know it was stolen, it's still not a legal act because what you're trying to sell was stolen. It was not procured legally. And finally, the contract is in the proper form. So notice in your textbook, if you're trying to sell something to another party and it has a value of $500 or more, that has to be in writing. And then it goes on to say in the text, if you can't fulfill a contract within a certain amount of time, a year, that also has to be in writing. And then other things that go on are things like real estate. That has to be in writing. So now, less than $500 is not real estate, etc. Can you enter an illegal contract by a handshake as long as you meet those 6 criteria we had before? Absolutely. And it's binding. if a contract is breached, one of the parties may be ordered to do some kind of performance, pay damages, and discharge the obligation. That means that, hello, oh no. Well, oh, okay, I'm back. I hope we don't have problems like we had before. All right, now we're going to talk about the Clayton Act of 1914. And this is things that really help the consumer. It outlawed exclusive dealing, time contracts, and interlocking directorates. It's a little more complicated than what we have here. The interlocking directorates were a number of companies that came together, really didn't have any used to be together, but it caused people to pay more money for things. Same way with time contracts. So we came up with some antitrust legislation. The first being the Federal Trade Commission was enacted in 1914, or created, I should say, and prohibits unfair methods in commerce. Unfair methods of competition, I should say. Then we had the Wheeler-Leah Amendment in 1938 that gave the Federal Trade Commission more control over false and misleading advertising. In the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, prohibited price discrimination, and that applies to both buyers and sellers. Let me go back up here a second. These are history of high-profile antitrust cases, which I'm not going to discuss. See these outlined in figure A3 on page A11 in your text. We have some consumer protections that many of us have taken for granted in the last few years, and I think maybe under assault by the new administration. Notice here, consumerism is a social movement that actually is on the side of the consumer to strengthen the ability of the buyer in relation to the seller, give him or her an equal footing, if you will. The collapse of the real estate market caused the beginning of the Dodd-Frank Act, which we talked about to some extent in Chapter 20, and you saw in the video which associated with Chapter 20, and led to some Wall Street reform, which again I think will be under assault with the new administration. Especially the last bullet, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now we're going to skip this slide. We're going to talk about taxes. That's taxes is our tax itself is a four-letter word to most Americans. Yes, I know tax is 3 letters and taxes is 5, but it's a four-letter word. We pay income tax, property tax, sales tax, excise tax, etc. There are things called sin taxes, which we know about and we have to be concerned about. So that's something that we do know, and they're around, and that helps fund the government to do the things that we want the government to do. We're going to end here with bankruptcy laws. It's a legal process by which businesses, our government entity or individuals, unable to meet their debts, are relieved of those debts, not completely, but relieved of them by a court. Several different kinds of bankruptcy. Straight bankruptcy, Chapter 7 applies to individuals. Chapter 11, reorganization, and Chapter 13, repayment plans go to businesses. This is the order in which creditors receive claims. We don't need to go through that, but we do need to understand that some people have a higher standing on a claim for bankruptcy than others do. This is how assets are divided in bankruptcy case. You can see this in your text in figure A6 at the bottom of page A16. And that brings us to the end of bonus chapter A. We're going to take a short break. It's 5:05. We'll come back at 5:07, and we will discuss bonus chapter C, managing risk. So please come back at 5:07. Oh, come on here. There we go. All right, 5:07, we're back. We're here to talk about managing risk. Now let's look at our learning objectives. Identify the environmental changes that have made risk management important. Explain the 4 ways of managing risk and distinguish between insurable and uninsurable risk. Define insurance policies and explain the law of large numbers and rule of indemnity. And then discuss the various types of insurance businesses can buy to manage risk. All right. Now, this particular slide begins with a term that you may not have heard of before, and that is ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. It defines a risk program, the risks, which risks a program will manage. The processes and technologies and investments required to manage the risk, and how the efforts will be coordinated across a business. I actually skipped the first slide, and that is, okay, excuse me. So what's risk? Risk means you have an opportunity to lose something. And notice it talks about their degree of probability and the amount that you might lose. A speculative risk means that you have a chance of either gaining or losing. You might make a profit, you might lose. In the stock market, somebody talked about, didn't understand why we would invest in the stock market. Well, you'd invest in the stock market to increase earnings. The only thing about the stock market, investing in stock markets, you need to understand that those investments are not insured by the United States government, like your passbook accounts and your certificates of deposit at your local bank or savings and loan association. And so there's a risk. And of course, you can ameliorate that risk by going into stocks that have good returns and have a small amount of risk, such as bond stocks or stocks that are associated with some stock, some bond, etc. And so that's speculative risk. And if you go into the stock market, you're speculating and saying, okay, I'm going to put down X number of dollars. And I think after 10 or 15 years, and I'll tell you why I use that in a second, that I'm going to have some money, going to have some more money than what I put in. because the stock price will go up, and maybe I'll get dividends, and maybe I'll be able to buy more shares, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's a risk. And of course, the downside to that is you may get in that, and 10 years later, it's worth less money than what you put in the first place. Ordinarily, that's not going to happen, but it could. Pure risk means you're going to lose everything. You haven't got a chance in the devil of being able to recover anything. And notice the last thing, not going to be any profit. You're going to get your shirt taken away from you. So the question becomes, how do you deal with pure risk? Well, if you reduce it, as the first bullet says, that means you're changing the game in some respects, so that it's no longer pure risk. It is now speculative risk, or it falls into that category. I like the other one, the next one, best. Avoid it altogether. Don't get into it. If you don't get into it, there's no risk involved. You can self-insure against the risk. That's saying, okay, I've got X dollars here in my pocket, or X dollars in the safe, or we've committed X dollars to say if this happens, we can pay it off. And the last thing is buying insurance. And that's what we do when we buy automobile insurance, or we buy homeowners insurance. We're trying to protect ourselves against the risk of theft, of fire, of an accident, of something else. And so if those things happen, we'll be able to recover most, if not all, of the worth of that particular piece of property that was damaged in some respect. Now we're going to come here to a term that most of us really aren't, excuse me, I'm not getting here where I want to go, and I have to apologize for that. But we don't really think about, although we may do this to some extent, but again, as I say, we don't normally think about it. And that is, what's self-insurance? Self-insurance to me means that we have set aside some funds to say, if this thing happens to us, here's the worst amount it could cost us. Well, let's just say for $100,000, we use that as a figure. And so we have that money set aside if this risk occurs, cover claims from somebody or something else. Now, some companies do what this next bullet talks about, going bare. Not to be confused with something you might find in the woods or in Alaska or some of our northern states or far western states like Montana and Wyoming and places like that, roaming around on 4 feet. This means is we're not going to insure, period. We're not going to buy any insurance, and we're not going to set aside any funds. And then here it talks about, now here it also talks about, and I gave you an extreme situation, but here it also talks about setting aside the money that we've talked about in the operating budget to pay out claims. So the bare there, as they're giving it, is saying we're not going to buy extra insurance. The bare, as I gave it to you, and some companies do this, not many perhaps, but some do, we're going to roll the dice and say whatever this catastrophe is that might happen, excuse my next expression, ain't going to happen, and so we're not going to worry about it. That is probably not a wise course of events, but it has happened. And of course, what happens then is that the companies are don't have the wherewithal, and if they have to pay out, and they'll lose their shirt and probably go out of business. Uninsurable risk. No insurance company will cover this. And here are the things that are mentioned here. Market risk. Now, like the stock market, I'll give you an example here in a minute. Political risk, political upheaval. We don't think of that in our country, but it does happen in other countries. Personal risk, again, and an operational risk. They're not going to do that. Market risk. Example I want to give you here is some years ago, a number of retired people from Procter & Gamble Company, which has its headquarters here in Cincinnati and is a Fortune 500 company, sued because they had most of their retirement tied up in Procter & Gamble stock, and the stock had taken a precipitous drop, which meant their portfolios were not worth as much as they had been. And so they sued. Now, that was not the entire market going south, if you will. It was a particular stock in the stock market. Well, the suit got to court, and the judge said, "Wait a minute, you know that's a risk, and you don't have any standing here." Doesn't mean to say the company's not still operating well. They try to say management caused this. So it's the risk of being in the market, and so their suit was without merit. Now, here's insurable risks. Notice here, there's things that make up this thing. You have to have something that has an insurable interest. So your home would, or your car, or some other piece of property, or something like a gem that you own, for instance. The loss has to be measurable, so you have to know what was lost. The chance of loss must also be measurable. Doesn't mean you will lose, but in case, we have to be able to measure it. Notice the critical thing comes forth. The loss has to be accidental. Insurance companies disperse their risk, and an insurance company can set standards for accepting whether or not they will insure a particular risk. This is just giving you an idea of the different types of public insurance. Starts off here with unemployment insurance, Social Security, flood insurance, etc. We're not going to go through all these. They are explained to you in figure C.1 on page C5, which you can read them at your leisure. Insurance policies, we have to pay attention to that. Remember, this is a contract. Once signed by the company, the insurance company, and you, the person who wishes to buy the insurance, it becomes legal. And the insurance company says for X dollars, we will insure your property, etc., for this amount of money. And we'll pay for it if there is accidental loss. Now, what that simply means is that if you decide you want to cash in and get $100,000 on your house, I'm only using that as a figure, and set fire to the house, that's not going to happen if somebody can prove the fact that you set the fire. Or you had somebody else set the fire, you paid somebody else to set the fire. But if a fire occurs from natural events like a storm or whatever, an accident, company's going to pay. The premium is simply what you pay the insurance company. However often you and the insurance company agree that payment has to be submitted. Normally speaking, if you pay the entire insurance premium up front, you get a rebate of some kind. If you stretch it out like 12 monthly payments, it's a little more. Quarterly payments a little bit less than 12. And semi-annual, some insurance companies will give you the same rate that they give if you pay for annually. And the claim is simply this: I had a loss. Here's my claim, Mr. or Miss Insurance Company. Please pay this amount. Now, these are the basics. The law of large numbers. What an insurance company wants to do to minimize their risk is to get as many possible people buying the same type of premium, people, organizations, etc. And if everyone is exposed to a similar type risk, I can spread that risk out because I have more people paying in and I'm going to have to pay out. Now, you're going to say, no, wait a minute. Everybody pays in and everybody has the same risk. That's exactly correct. But everybody, the risk of everybody, or the happenstance of everybody having the same risk happen to them all at the same time, is minimal. For instance, my wife and I have been homeowners for a large number of years in different states in the United States. And we've never had a fire. We've had some homeowner things that we've gone through and asked them to pay for. We had a chimney repaired once and a couple of other things, but certainly nothing major. And you know, we paid insurance all these years to protect us against possible loss. And you know, whatever you pay is worth it because it gives you peace of mind among other things. And the rule of indemnity is you can't collect more than what the loss, the actual loss or from the insurable risk. So if you're insured for $50,000, for instance, you can't collect $100,000. You know, it doesn't work that way. So it's not something that's going to help you. Different types of insurance companies. It's not a big issue, but just so you know, we have a stock company and a mutual insurance company. A stock company is owned by stockholders. That's pretty simple, just like any other investment owner. The difference between that and a mutual company is this is an organization that's owned by the policyholders. So what that means is stock, I could buy stock in a company and say, stock insurance company, and not have an insurance policy with them. Different down here with the mutual company. If I have a policy with them, I am an owner of the company. All right, let's move on here. This just gives you an idea of different stock insurance companies and mutual insurance companies. Stock companies like Hartford Life and Metropolitan, mutual companies like Mass Mutual and New York Life, also Northwestern Mutual. I'm not trying to leave anybody out here. Health insurance, I'm not going to go over this. And the reason I'm not going to go over this is because we can expect some changes in the Affordable Care Act. I think the problem that we're having right now is the people in charge aren't sure what they want to do. They know they want to abolish the Affordable Care Act, but they're not sure how to do that. And the problem with abolishing the Affordable Care Act is we have a great number of people who have health insurance, never had health insurance before. If you pull that rug out from underneath them, there's going to be a lot of complaint. So the Congress and the administration have to be very careful about what they're doing. Should the Affordable Care Act be abolished? I don't know that answer. Should the Affordable Care Act be altered in some respects? Yeah, probably that's true. It probably needs to be fixed to make it better or make it more reactive or whatever the thing happens to be. But we're going to see some changes there. We're going to see some changes in other type of healthcare plans that are available through your employer, etc. So I don't want to talk too much about that because I expect lots of change, and I don't think most of us know what to expect. Other types of health insurance: disability health insurance, workers' compensation. We've seen some of that before. Liability insurance, personal liability insurance. Usually you see people in the professions such as medicine, dentistry, law, etc., buying professional liability insurance to guard against malpractice suits. Product liability insurance covers liability arising out of the number of products sold or something wrong with them. And of course, that would be for manufacturers. Home-based businesses, and as you know, or at least I hope you know, with the continued rise of the internet, we're finding more home-based businesses, people using the internet to sell things. You have to make sure that your policy that you own, insurance policy that you own, covers the home part of your business or the business part in your home. And many policies don't. So you need to make sure, talk to your agent, make sure what you have to do. Notice down here the second bullet, you may need to get what's known as a rider on your homeowner's insurance. Now just make sure that you do that. If you intend to open a business in your home, make sure that the area in which you live is zoned for business. If it's not zoned for business, then don't open a business. And then make sure that you talk to your insurance agent and get the type of homeowners insurance that you need, a rider, etc. Well, at 5:25, that brings us to the end of Chapter C, Managing Risk. We'll take a break to 5:27 and come back and talk about bonus Chapter D, Personal Finance. Please come back at 5:27. Thank you. All right, 5:27, Chapter D, our last session for the course, Managing Personal Finances. Let's look at the learning objectives. Outline the 6 steps for controlling your assets. Explain how to build a financial base, including investing in real estate, saving money, and managing credit. Explain how buying the appropriate insurance can protect your financial base. And finally, outline a strategy for retiring with enough money to last the rest of your life. All right, let's begin here. 6 steps to control your finances. And I'm not going to go over all of these because they're really self-explanatory. You find them beginning on page D3 in your text. You have to know what you have, what your assets are. You have to keep track of what you spend. Have a budget. Now, I'll come back to that in a second. Pay off your debts as best you can and as quickly as you can. I'll come back to that too. Start a savings plan. And then finally, borrow money only to buy assets. Normally speaking, an asset is something that increases in value over time. So prepare a budget. I don't want to come back to that. Many people think that a budget's going to be a hard and fast rule. And in some cases, depending upon where you are, a budget can be a hard and fast rule. But a budget's a guideline. It tries to keep you within certain parameters. And so it just tells you, here we are, here's where we want to go, and let's try to keep our expenses, in this case, under control. Pay off your debts. The one I would mention more than anything else is credit card debt. If you have credit card debt of $1,000 and you paid only the minimum every month, and assuming you did not run up any other debt on that particular credit card, it would take you about 10 years to pay off that $1,000. Remember, when you use your credit card, not debit card, credit card, the company's card that you're using is lending you money. And you have to pay that back at the time they tell you to pay it back. Otherwise, it's going to cost you. Now, I always take time at this when I come to this and say, that I have a number of credit cards and I pay my credit card bill off every month. I'm fortunate I'm able to do that. Uh, I suspect there's going to come a time when the company's going to say, wait a minute, we're not making any money on you. You're going to have to pay an annual fee like I do with American Express. I have an American Express card I've had for over 30 years, and I pay a fee every year for that. And my wife has a card that's associated with mine, and we pay a fee for hers. Her fee is less than mine, but that's not a big deal. It's because we have more than one card. And this is what you have to think about here. What's your normal budget, household budget's going to have? It's your mortgage or your rent, food and clothing, utilities, etc. There's other things that are mentioned here, but I'm not going to go into them. What we're talking about here are necessities. You have to have a roof over your head. You have to have food and something to wear. You have to pay for utilities, light and heat, etc. So insurance needs, that's not a necessity. Some people will say it is, but you don't have to have insurance. In some states, you have to have insurance to operate a motor vehicle, but you don't have to have homeowners insurance. There's nothing that says that unless you have a loan with a lending institution, and it says, we're going to give you this is for you to buy homeowners insurance. And sometimes that's part of your mortgage. But other than that, there's no requirement. And actually, that's not a law. It's just the insurance. It's just the lending company, financial institution saying, you want us to lend you the money, this is what you have to do. If you don't do it, we're not going to lend you the money. As simple as that. So those are, you know where those things are, and you need to, pay attention to them. Okay, now this particular slide, and I'm not going to go over this slide, but it's worthwhile paying attention to. How do you save costs? You can find this in the figure D1 at the page at the top of page D5. Cut down on some things that you do on an everyday basis that you really don't need to do. Fast food lunch. Maybe you work in a place you can pack your lunch. And now where I work, I would have to go outside the building where my office is. I'd have to go outside the building to get something to eat. I bring my lunch with me. I've been doing that for years. I'm used to it. Doesn't mean I wouldn't go out. It's just I'm not going to do that. This gives you an idea of how your money grows. Again, this is down at the bottom of page D5. Figure D.2. The unfortunate fact is the annual rate of return here, mostly we're talking about rate of return at savings. Most places that I know don't pay 2%. And so we're still climbing out of this recession, and the banks have not, even though the Federal Reserve, we talked about this last week or so, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, and they have done at least once here recently. Banks have been reluctant to pass that interest rate increase on to the saver. So some pay a little bit better than others, but most, if you're simply talking about a passbook saving account, are less than 1%. Now, if you have a lot more money in there than that, they may pay you more than 1%. And time deposits like certificate of deposits, et cetera, they may get more money as well, but then they're asking you to hold the money a little bit longer. But this gives you an idea of how your money grows. This particular slide just gives you easy budget cuts, and I don't want to go down on this because this is negative. It's just cutting down. Really, instead of saying, hey, what can we do that would substitute for this? Think about different ways here of stretching our dollars, as opposed to let's cut back on this and let's cut back on that. Let's cut back on something else. This talks about increasing your wealth. Is what I want to say. It says financial basic, but I say increasing your wealth. Live within your means. You can take that word frugally out. Frugally is a negative word that says that you're not a spender. But living frugally means don't take this to be negative, because I said it was negative and it is negative, but you take it to be unnegative simply by saying I'm going to live within my means. I'm not going to spend beyond what I can afford to spend. Now, yeah, okay, once in a while I might splurge, but that's not going to be the rule of thumb. Think about buying a house as an initial investment. Now, I do want to give you a caution here. The rule of thumb to get your initial investment out of a home is that you must own it a minimum of 3 years. Some people would say it's a minimum of 5. So you want to get your investment out. I can tell you that's probably true. I spent a number of years in the Army, and my wife and I traveled and lived in several different states in the United States. We were fortunate most of the places we stayed, we were able to stay for at least 4 years. So we felt like we got our investment back. And this last thing about not living beyond your means, that goes back to that be frugal. Notice here, the first thing it says about this 5 rules of frugality, don't give us something you like. If it really means something to you, continue to do it. But there are other things you may be able to give up, or that you really don't need. You may want something, but you don't need it. Think about it in those terms. Notice here it says, never go shopping without knowing exactly what you want to buy. Yeah, I think that's true, but then you have to change the dynamic there, because a shopper is somebody who looks around. A buyer is somebody who has already made up his or her mind. I'm going to XYZ store and I'm going to purchase this. Remember, a home can be an investment. Some people would disagree with it, but it can be. If you're buying a home and you're paying a mortgage, it's a good way to force yourself to save money. And remember, the interest you pay on your home loan is tax deductible. And then if you're looking to buy a home as an investment, you have to look at what the 3 major things of anything, and they all are the same word: location, location, location. This particular slide here is seen in your text, figure D.3 on page D8. This tells you if you're going to spend, if you have this much income, how much you can spend on a home to buy a home. So look at that, pay attention to it. Don't go beyond your means in any kind of a home. And of course, you have to pay attention to interest rates. Now, interest rates right now are fairly low, so you may want to consider. I mean, I can remember buying a house some years ago, and we had a 12% interest rate. The big deal was we didn't have to pay any points when we settled. I think the next one when I was still in the Army then, and the next one we moved to, the interest rate had dropped a little bit, but certainly not at the historic lows not real lows, but the lows that they are in today. Managing and saving on credit. This talks about the contrarian approach, and here it talks about stock. Buy stock when everybody else is selling, and vice versa. That's not always easy to know, but sometimes you can. Use credit cards wisely. I'm not going to get into all of those things, but I will tell you, as the slide says, not all credit cards are equal. So if you're interested in credit cards, you can shop around. There used to be some banks, in South Dakota that had very low yearly rates, or very low interest rates. So look around for them. Some credit cards are 18–20% on the unpaid balance. Others are less than that. So look for one that's going to give you the best rate. I'm not going to go too much into the Credit Card Protection Act, but do understand that you are protected if a credit card is stolen, and you're only going to have to pay I think $50 or something like that. And then remember that you need to be over 21 to have a credit card and to make sure that you have good credit. Check your credit rating on an annual basis. Be careful about getting rid of cards or getting cards, because that changes your credit card number. It changes your credit rating. And then it talks about what your score is. Scores have changed some. This figure here, these figures here may not be 100% accurate, but gives you something to go on. And you are entitled to one free credit report a year. And it's just a good thing to get to keep up with it. And remember, you can challenge things. Insuring your life. There are a lot of people that tell you that pay attention to what you're buying. You may want to consider term insurance. If you're a young person, that's a good way to do it. So you don't spend a lot of money for a large amount of coverage, and then that coverage decreases over a certain period of time, and perhaps gets you to a point where your children are out of the house, and you can think about doing something different. Whole life insurance gives you some insurance, which covers through the remainder of your life, and it's also a savings account in a way. So you get some. You have the face value of the policy, and then there's some savings that go along with it. You need to check with your agent or check with an agent and see what that is, and buy insurance that is best for you. Don't be oversold insurance. Buy whatever's best for you. Variable insurance, like insurance, invests the cash value in stocks and other higher earning security instruments. Again, find out if that's the right thing for you. If it is, think about it. If it's not, then stay away from it. An annuity is a contract. Notice the word contract, to pay regular payments to an individual for life or a fixed period. And it's going to guarantee the income until you are no longer around. Two types, fixed and variable. Again, you need to check on the differences between them to buy the right type of policy for you. And remember, that's the first thing you want to think about, is the right type of policy for you, for your lifestyle, to cover what you want covered. Not what the insurance agent thinks you want covered, what you want covered. Disability insurance, exactly what it says. It pays a long-term for sickness or disability. It won't pay, for the most part, it won't make up your loss of salary, but it will give you a percentage of it. Homeowners and renters insurance, we know what that is. We've talked about it before. And then umbrella policy is what it says. It covers a multitude of things: life, homeowners, auto, etc. Health savings accounts, those come through your employer. You need to check with them and see what kind of things they are. Remember that the plans can be costly, but you can withdraw for medical benefits as tax-free. Remember, they're not for everyone, and if they're set up, they're pre-tax dollars, so you can take that off your insurance. Social Security, we know what that is. We pay into that now. We constantly hear Social Security is under fire, won't have enough money, etc. Congress does need to come up with a plan, but then Congress needs to come up with a plan that will not hurt other people. Right now, the amount that you pay in is capped at $102,000. A lot of people pay into Social Security that make more money than that. So the question to me is, why shouldn't they pay on that higher amount? Now, the converse is, well, let's raise the Social Security retirement age. All right. For a person that's making $102,000 or more a year, raising his or her retirement age probably isn't going to make any difference. But a person that's making $30,000 a year, you raise it from 65 to 70, it's going to make a big difference. That person's going to have to work 5 more years so he or she can keep body and soul together. So however we figure this out, it has to be equal. If there's pain, the pain has to go around equally. If there's benefit, the benefit has to go around equally. We can't favor one class of people over another, or one strata of financial class over another. Individual retirement accounts, certainly something that I would advise anybody to think about. You get these through your employer, or you're making a thing. And the thing about an IRA is it's deferred investment. You're putting your money in now, and you don't pay any tax until it comes out. A Roth IRA, on the other hand, you can pay money in all along, and you don't pay any tax when you take it out. So you may want to look at that. If you do get into a retirement plan at your work, make sure that all of your IRA does not go into company stock. I'm not saying your company stock is not good. What I'm saying is you need to diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Look, see if your company has tax-deferred contributions. No current taxes, which is what an IRA does, but there are other ones that you can look for as well, such as health savings accounts, etc. This gives you more information about the Roth, which I just talked about. And this next one, My IRA, it's a new type of Roth account for low and middle income individuals. I can only tell you this. I don't know a lot about that plan. I need to find out more about it so I can provide more information. 401k plan. This is sponsored by an employer, which is like an IRA that I was talking about before. You deposit a set amount of money, and your employer will match that up to a certain amount. Not always. Remember that when you do this, these are pre-tax dollars. So you are paying less in income tax because it's taken off the top. And so it is a benefit. And remember, as I mentioned before, you earn and don't pay any tax until you withdraw. There's the benefits of 401k plan. It reduces your taxable income. Taxes deferred on the earnings, and of course some employers will match. And finally, a Kehoe plan is similar to a 401k. The difference is it's for self-employed individuals, and they can be withdrawn in lump sums or spread out over years. Well, at 5:48, that brings us to the end of bonus chapter D in our presentation for this evening. I hope that these presentations have been beneficial to you. If you liked them, please let me know. If you did not like them, please let me know that as well. You may want to wait until after your grades have been turned in to do that. Although if you give me a criticism, that has no bearing on anything that I'm going to do about looking at your work. But if you do like them, tell me what you liked. If you didn't like them, tell me what you didn't like and how you think they can be improved. All of us learn by getting feedback from others. So again, I thank you for your attention this evening, and good night.